So layer 2 is complete. That is now all of the yellow cedar on the hull, both on the bottom and on the sides. Next up, we can move on to layer 3, where things are going to change a little bit. This is going to be the finished final planking of the hull, and that's a nice stage to get to. This is when we're going to really start to see how Temptress actually looks. We're going to be doing longitudinal planking down the hull sides. We're going to be doing some longitudinal planking on the bottom for the parts that are going to be visible when the waterline is painted. And then we're going to be doing diagonal mahogany planking for the rest of the bottom. Now I've got some ideas for how we can do this process a little bit differently to how you would normally do this. These planks would normally have to be manually patterned and laid out onto boards of stock, then cut to size, which is a very time-consuming process. Given that we have a complete 3D CAD model of this boat and we already have all of the plank arrangement modeled, we may as well utilize that information and try and refine things a little bit going forwards. And after all, that is what this project is all about. I'm looking to find ways in which we can make modern wooden boat building more efficient. And you've already seen a lot of that rolled out with the pre-shaping of components such as the stem and the framing. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a slightly different way to approach the hull side planking by unwrapping those planks in CAD and forming flat patterns that should give us a pre-cut, ready-sized plank. Now, I don't actually know how well this process is going to work. I've done unwrapped planks before, but not quite in a fine finished hull side planking like this boat is. So this may well result in quite a lot of wasted wood, but I'm all here for doing R&D and experimenting and trying to look at how things can change for wooden boats going forwards. So let's get into the process. Let's start cutting our first plank and I'll talk you through how I think it might work. By the way, I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds and I'm building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michelle Berriere and kitted by myself to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. Okay, so there's plank number 1. Cut relatively nicely. I have got a bit of break out on the back side of it, which is a little disappointing, and that's really my fault for not looking a little bit closer at this stock, because looking at that break, I believe that was probably a defect present in the board before I cut. So that's not ideal, but let's look at some other things, because I suspect this might not be a user anyway. There's something a little bit odd going on with these holes. Now what I've done with these planks to give me some trim room in the CAD model is I've added 1mm to the outside of the faces that are going to mate together. So when we have planks go together here to here, I've added 1mm to either side, which is going to give me a little bit of trim room just to fettle those in and account for any errors in the unwrapping. I've added 5mm onto the top where the shear is, so that I have a good overhang of a plank here, and it just allows me a bit of adjustment, which I can easily trim in on the shear line. I'll also do the same on the chine, because we can overhang this and then trim back down. It's just going to give me a bit of juggle room for all of that. Now, I think this edge here should be the shear, so we should have an extra 5mm there. And I drew the holes originally 12mm from the edge, which that is plus my 1mm. So this edge looks good, although it shifts down here. I wonder if what's happened is I drilled all the holes first, then I screwed the plank down, and I wonder if I've shifted it a little bit when I've done that. That could be possible, or it could be something in the program. I'm just going to dive back and have a look at that in a second. Yeah, we've got 15mm from the edge there, but then that one is only 13 from the edge. This should be more material. So anyway, I'll do a bit of investigation on that. The other thing is, you'll notice this is a rather thick plank. This is 18mm thick. My intention for this is to cut the planks like this, resaw them on either the bandsaw or on the table saw, and then fit them to the boat. The target finished thickness is a 6mm plank, so the thought is that I'm going to start with 18mm stock. I'm going to resaw that down the centre, and after sanding I'm hoping to get 2 6mm planks. That will allow me to book match planks, so that I've got grain matching exactly the same for each plank on either side of the boat. So given that this could well be a scrapper, it's actually a perfect opportunity to try that. So let's get onto the bandsaw and we'll try resawing this and see how that goes. Okay, so that gives me a set of book matched planks. That's the reason for the name book matching, is we open them up like that, and what we end up with is a mirrored grain image of both sides. These are the faces that we want on the outside of the boat, so we've got to keep careful control of that to make sure that that's where they stay, and then the boat will visually look the same from both sides. Not that you'll ever see them both at the same time. Now I want to do minimal machining on this face because the further we come away from that cut line, the more this changes, and it's not really that much of a problem when we're talking about either side of the boat. But we want to make sure this is a nice, good cut without too much material needing to be cleaned up. And to be honest, that's cut pretty damn good. I'm pleased with that actually. So I'll run those through the sander now. What I'll do is I'll get these faces clean, and then I'll take the back face down to our finished 6mm that we need to be at. It's not looking bad. Okay, so my plank seams should run down the center line of these topside batten marks that we've put in place, and that's the reason we've carried these through. As well as giving guidance for where our screws want to land. So I'm going to put a tick mark at either end of the plank, just so I can get that seam in the right place. Okay, so that is looking pretty good. It's followed that curvature well, and there is a lot of curvature to this because of the flare in the top sides. The real test of this process is going to come when we butt the next plank up to this edge and we see how well these two edges mate, and that's really probably where I'm going to need the trim room and adjustment. We could probably do with a bit more material on the top here. This is where I'd really like to have an overhang that I can flush that shear down to. That looks a little bit shy to me, despite the fact that underneath is slightly overhanging. So I'd definitely like more material there, which should also give me a bit of adjustment. I did chew up that corner on the sander, which is annoying, and that's definitely something I've got to avoid. Is we've got to make sure those plank edges are really neat. The screw shift thing, something I've got to just jump on the computer and investigate. It's not the end of the world because these are 5mm holes at the moment. They're going to end up being 12mm half-inch plugs. So there's a little bit of scope for adjusting them to get them to look right. The other thing I'm not sure about at the moment, I've currently done the screw spacings starting evenly in the joint corner and then going 100mm even spacings along that chord in CAD. What that means is that we get a shift of spacings throughout the plank, as you can see. I don't know whether that's what I want or whether I want them vertically all the same throughout the plank. I haven't quite yet decided. What I definitely do want is the next plank for them to line up so that we've got two in pairs here. I don't want them to steadily sort of shift. So that's going to be something else to look out for. I don't really know what the etiquette is on that. I know with the Chris Craft we're kind of doing these in pairs, which is how I would normally do them. So I'm not sure on that. We'll take a view on it. What I think I'll do is I'll just jump on the computer and take a look at what's happened with this edge and this offset, because I suspect I haven't ended up with what I desired there. Okay, so I've just jumped up on the computer to take a look at the plank. Here you can see the one that I'm working on, and I have found the culprit. I'm pleased to say that I can actually blame Fusion for this one. It's not an error that I've made, so that's always nice to find. So we'll take a look at how I do these holes. If I edit this feature in the timeline, you can see that to place these holes we use a function called pattern on path. So that's going to allow us to repeat something, whether that's a part or a function, along a designated path. In this case, we drill one hole at the end of the plank and then we repeat that along the path, which you can see in blue here. And we create that path by doing an offset from the plank edge. Now, if we look at what it's done, you can see the holes in green and you can see the path in blue. It's actually not stuck to the path that it's used, which is very unusual for Fusion. It's normally pretty spot on for this. You can see it started on there and not followed it. So that is where the deviation of my holes have come from. And I don't really know why that's happened. So I'm going to have to take a bit of a look into that. There are a couple of different ways I could approach this process, so I'll play around with that and I'll make sure that I check for that before we cut any more parts. Whilst I'm on the computer, I'll show you very quickly what I'm doing here. So I'll load up the Temptress model. Now you can see, I'll turn all the planking on so that you can see it. Okay, so that is our fully planked hull side, and you can see that these are all divided up into where the planks need to be, where the joins are, and what sort of shape they are. You can see the real twisty shape in some of these. So they would be a challenge to pattern manually. So the plank I've just done is this one here, port 1A. And you can see that that's what we start with. So if I turn all the other stuff off, that is the plank that we want. Now to flatten that, I have to go into an external program. This isn't a function that Fusion currently has within it. So we export that plank, I flatten that out, and then we get over to what we have here. So this originally comes in as just the outer skin of that plank, which is then flattened. And the accuracy to which this is done can vary depending on how severe that curvature and twist is. Now this is probably the most twisted plank, so it's the one that we're most likely to see errors on. And then what we do is we'll draw the outline of that. I'll take out any errors in the unwrapping. As you can see here, there's just a little tuck in. So I've just drawn a straight line through that to get rid of that little error, and we'll generally clean up the plank ends and things. Then what I'll do is the sketch that offsets that outer edge and allows me to formulate my rail for my holes. And then what I'll do is produce my finished plank, which is now a solid body. And then I can go over to manufacture and create the toolpath program, which will drill that and cut it out. So that's roughly how we get from the CAD model to a flattened plank. I've got to do that with every plank in the hull side and make sure that everything's correct. Having those holes pre-drilled is going to save a lot of time with marking out, but it is going to be dependent on whether or not that gives me the visual look that I want. I may go over to just marking those with the machine and then drilling them manually, but it's all an experiment. We're finding what method works, so we'll play around with things and see how it goes. So I'm going to get that queued up, get the holes checked for the second plank. Let's cut another one, butt it up to that one on the boat and see how things look. Not so good this one. Bit of wander on the bandsaw, which is definitely taking that below thickness, and this one's really thick, so that's a bit disappointing. Okay, so plank number 2, bit of a disappointment here. We've had a significant wander with the bandsaw, and you can see we've got one plank that's under spec, one that's way over, so that is unfortunately a scrapper. I did suspect it wasn't cutting very well. It sounded like it was kind of struggling. Yeah, massive wander by the time we got to the end. Combination of things really. The bandsaw's probably not set up as well as it should be, and it has really got to be spot on for this. Blade's a little old, which isn't ideal. What I'm going to try with one of these pieces is just seeing if I can do it on the table saw, because a good technique to get really accurate resaws is to cut in from both sides with a table saw and then just hog the middle out with a bandsaw. I'm going to see if I've got enough thickness in this plank to cope with the kerf of the table saw blade. So the kerf is the width of the blade, which we're obviously wasting out the middle of the board. It's very thin on the bandsaw, especially with this blade I've got right now. So it's whether or not we can get 2 6mm planks out, but it's a bit of a balance really, because you get a better cut, therefore less waste when you clean up, but you've got a wider blade kerf in the interim. So I'm going to try it on a bit of scrap, this here, see if we can end up with 2 6mm out of that. That would be a much more sustainable thing. I don't really want to be CNC cutting stuff and then ruining it at the resaw stage. Okay, that's better. That gets me 7mm either side, a millimetre cleanup. It's pretty tight, but I'm confident that we'll get a much better cut with that. All consistency. So I'll just pop the new blade on the table saw to give me an extra fighting chance. It's not been changed in some time. And unfortunately, I'll have to cut that plank again, and we'll scrap that one. Okay, revision 2. Some immediate differences that you'll notice. I've done away with the holes. The decision I came to was that the holes, trying to get these oriented correctly in a flat pattern reference relative to how the boat looks, was going to be really difficult, and once they're drilled in the plank, it gives me no room to correct that or even kind of gauge what's going on, and it could potentially mean I scrap planks. It also means if I've got to do adjustments to these edges here, that I'd be encroaching on that plug and I could end up with it at the wrong place. Coupled with that, I messaged Andrew Burge and he told me how to do these lines, so this is how I've done them. So we've started with a laser, which you'll have just seen me do in the center of the boat to give me a plumb line, and then I've worked out at equal spacings, 180 millimeters for each of these, all the way through, and these will then get transferred through to my planks, and these will be my plug lines which will run evenly all the way through the boat. There'll be something slightly different probably done when we get a plank join, but that's okay, we can do an extra plug where we need it there. So those two have fitted really nicely, as far as I can currently tell. I've done an additional offset here. I did a 15mm offset off the bottom edge here, so I've now got plenty of overhang on the shear to trim into, possible adjustment this way. I've done a 1mm offset this way, which I'm going to stick with. I've done an extra 25mm off the end so that I can shift planks around if I need to. And that's the first two. So the first two, because of the huge curvature in this, I've split this plank into two. If you cut that from one piece of stock, it would be a really wide piece of stock because of the curvature that's happening this way. So I'll split it in the middle, and that means that these are relatively short planks. The next plank I'm going to do, there's not that much curvature in it, there's a lot of twist in it as it runs back aft, but we can actually do this in one complete plank, and here is said stock, 4 and a bit meters. So I'm going to cut that one next. This is going to present its own challenges, not least because my machine isn't that long. So what we're going to need to do is cut this using indexing, where we cut part of the profile and then we shift the stock, and then we cut the second part of the profile and we get the two to meet. It's not quite so straightforward as normal indexing, where you would cut it and then slide it through the machine and then cut the next bit. I'm going to have to actually cut it facing this way and then flip the board over and then cut it from the other side, which is more similar to two-sided machining actually, rather than indexing. And it's been a bit of a head scratcher to work out how to do that, but that is what's next on the list. I'm going to try and get this plank cut. Then I've got the challenge of re-sawing the giant plank with that in the way. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So let's get that one cut, see what happens. Hopefully we don't waste any more wood. And the resawing on the table saw works absolutely perfectly. That cut really neatly. In actual fact, it's less machining. It's like 2 or 3 passes through the sander to end up with a 6mm plank. So that works really well. I'm sticking with that method. So all good. We're learning things, we're improving, and we're getting better with each time. So let's cut this big plank. Okay, so there's plank 2. Looks pretty good all in all. We've got a slight little shift around the overlap here, so there's 100mm overlap in these programs, and you can see we've got a little nib there. It's maybe a millimeter, so I think I can just take that out with the block plane, and my little overhang extra bit of material will give me the wiggle room I need there. We can maybe try and get that better next time. It's probably due to the fact that I'm referencing just off a rough sawn edge. If I was to use the jointer on that edge, that might get rid of that, but I'm pretty pleased with that. That looks pretty good. So we'll get that released out, drop it in place, and see what happens. Now, a good fit along here is all well and good. This is looking really nice. The real test of this process is going to be when we put the second plank on up against it. When I'm unwrapping planks, 90% of the time this is in a sort of plywood boat building scenario, and generally you're doing an entire hull side, which allows you trim room. You can overhang the chines, you can overhang the shear, and that unwrap doesn't have to be that accurate. What I'm attempting to do here is to unwrap seriously tight edge fit seams of planks that fit together. So it's a bit of a different challenge, and I'm not entirely sure how well it's going to work, but I know what you're thinking. Just get on and put the plank in place, Dan, because I want to see it. So here's plank number 2, and when we offer that up into place, it's pretty nice. Now I'll get that clamped in and I'll show you a bit closer what it looks like. Okay, so that seam straight off the machine, pretty damn good. You can see there's a slight gap in the center there, and I haven't actually got these properly pulled in yet. We'll actually screw these down, which may close that gap. It may allow me to just tweak that a bit, but let's be honest, that is a hairline. That fitment's pretty damn awesome. I am pleased with that. One thing to consider is we're in a section of the boat where the hull is flaring, so it's doing this, which means if you kind of magnify this joint here, you can imagine that this plank is sort of tipped this way, this plank's tipped this way. So the back side of this joint is going to be opened up. So if you imagine the planks are kind of doing this, that's going to work in my favor right now, because that means that this seam is going to be together. And what we've probably got, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a very slight gap on the back side of it. So don't want to be deceived into thinking that this is a really tight, good seam, and then when we fare the hull and we take the material further away, we start to open that gap up. This is all on quite exaggerated scales, really. So we've just got to watch out for that. I might have to put a slight little back bevel on this plank just to make sure that it sits that tightly all the way along, but to be honest, that's a parcel too with a block plane, and it's looking pretty damn good. It's also landing in the center line of the next batten up, which is where I need it to finish. So, yeah, pretty pleased with that. Very pleased with that. These are going to be quite short planks in the forward section of the boat here because it's so flared. We've got a lot of edge set to them. Some boat builders would plank boats like this with one continuous plank the entire length of the boat. That's going to end up meaning that you'd need massively wide stock, and I'm quite keen to make sure that this boat is built, you know, both as a Dan Lee boat, but also for other people that want to build this boat in quite a kind of approachable way. So I want it to be able to be built with stock that's readily available, that's not crazy dimensions. You know, some companies will plank a boat and they'll buy a complete tree and all the planking's exactly the same, matched color and everything. I want this to just be able to be built to a high standard, but also to just be readily available from standard stock that people can easily access. I'm sizing all of these planks so that we can get every plank from 200 mil wide stock, which is really feasible to get hold of. It's nothing ridiculously rare or anything like that. So that does mean we're going to end up with slightly shorter planks in the forward sections here, but as we go up and the flare reduces, we'll get into doing more longer planks. So the next one's going to be about the same length as this, maybe a bit longer. But yeah, let's get that cut, see how it fits, and if it's as good as that, I'm pretty happy. So let's try that out. So I'm actually doing the CAD work for each individual plank at a time rather than doing the whole side. I'm taking a view on how best to arrange things like the short planks up forward and cutting them one at a time. I lay them out one at a time, and what I'm actually doing is I'm looking at the wood grain when I run this program. So I've programmed all the planks so that they hook this way out to the right and then across to the left. And when I'm placing a board on the machine, I'm also thinking about that in the same way that you would think about this if you were just laying out a spiraled pattern. So you can see that my grain here is ever so slightly following the same direction. That's because I've placed the board so that it does that. If I were to put the board that way, you can see my grain's slightly doing that, which is the opposite to what my plank's going to do. So if I fit it this way round on the machine, to a degree, my grain is going to follow the curvature of my plank, which is ideal because we get less run out that way. So I'm thinking about things like that consciously as well when I'm cutting these. Okay, so you can see what I mean there. Look, the grain is following the curvature round of my plank. Now, it's not always possible to do this, but if it's an option, we want to utilize it really just to minimize run out of the grain. And you can see it starts to run out a little bit more here where the board straightens. But it's nice to consciously think about those things if we can. That's a bit more like what I expected. So this one isn't quite fitting correctly, but to be honest, it's kind of too low in the middle. So what might be the case is that I haven't got this plank quite placed, because actually the edge curvature is matching. So I'm just gonna loosen these a touch. I think if I get that plank right, yes, that's definitely within trimming room. It's going to need some trimming, I think, which was really what I expected. That's getting a bit closer now. I think the key as well is going to be getting this shear plank laid in the true position. Definitely got to make sure that that curve is laid as it should be, so that all the rest of the planks follow. And I think if I get that right, that's going to work. That's already significantly better just with a bit of jiggling. Yeah, do you know, that almost will push in with next to no trimming. That's getting good. Yeah, and I think I'm actually going to need, just thinking out loud now, I think I'm actually going to need all of the second row of planking to help me to get the first row of planking set in the correct curve, because you can kind of juggle this around a bit, but I think that's going to help me get this right, and then once this is right, I'll bond that on, and then I can work up the whole side with ease, and it should all fit. Okay, so that is some of the second layer put in place. Most of the second layer, back to there. This is fitting exceptionally well. I found that actually once you pull this first one into place, the two of these help to form the right curve, which is definitely working well. We've got areas here with a like tiny little gap, which isn't a lot. You know, that's a kind of one pass with a block plane like here kind of gap. So we're really snug as best I can get this fit right now. I think what I really need to do next is to start transposing lines down, get some screw holes in here. I think I've done enough to confirm that this edge is good, definitely good enough to then start placing screw holes, get this one screwed in place and dry fit, and then probably come up with a slightly better system of doing this, which I can sort of envisage will be a little block screwed on here with a little wedge that I can just tap underneath it and just push the second plank down into it, something like that. Another thing we'll do is that when I've got screw holes in here, I'll have a little tab of wood that will stick up and just hold this plank in place, and then we can just spin it away, use it like a little toggle just to stack the next plank. But I've definitely done enough to prove the concept to the point I'm happy that this is really going to work, which is pretty cool. And all credit to Sykes Timber for this Utile I'm using. It's beautiful. We've got some really nice grain in this. You can really start to see how this boat's going to come together, how she's going to look. So that's layer 3 well underway, and a great proof of concept. I'm really pleased with how this has actually worked, and when I shot the intro to this video, I genuinely didn't know if this was going to be an even feasible concept. So for planks to be edge fitting as well as they are, I'm very happy. So really pleased with that. It's going to really make this planking go quickly. This is going to hugely speed up the process. We'd have to be manually creating a pattern for each one of these planks, laying that out on a board, then cutting it on the bandsaw, and then doing a final fitment of it. And that would take a hell of a lot longer than how long this has taken me to do this. Bear in mind, I'm doing the CAD as I go here, so once the CAD's done, those files are out there, and of course anybody who has got a set of boat plans for Temptress, you guys will be getting those files as well, so you can undertake this exact same process. If you do fancy building one of these boats yourself, of course, do remember that we sell the boat plans for this on our website, so you can utilize all of the build practices that I'm doing here, and we have outlets both in the UK and the US to supply kits to you to undertake everything that I'm doing that you see in this series. If you're enjoying these videos and you would like to help support the project and the channel, then hop over to Patreon and take a look at some of the extra behind the scenes things that we're doing there. You get discounts on stuff, merch, a whole extra video series that Sasha, my wife, does where she checks in on what I'm doing throughout the week in the workshop, and a whole load of other things as well. Plus, you'd be supporting a really great project, and you'd be allowing me to spend more time working on projects like this. We do greatly rely upon the additional support from outside of what we get from YouTube revenue, which is pretty poor. So really appreciate that if you could jump on there and help us out. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found this video insightful and useful. I've certainly enjoyed the process of working this out, and I'm looking forward to see the rest of the hull sides come together. So I'll catch you guys in the next one, where we'll press on up with the planking. Cheers.